shout out to the IT group because I watched them rewire this whole room over the last hour. And I'm going to give you my take-home messages right now, so if you want to go get a beer or something like that, you've got the messages. One is we really live on an ocean planet. All the climate and weather that you experience in the middle of the country and everything is really heavily driven by the state of the ocean. The ocean holds 150 times more energy and heat than the atmosphere. And so that's the heat reservoir of the planet. And if you go through history, those that know the seas control economies, control global reach and everything, and so it's a good lesson from history. The technology we used, we were essentially blind studying oceanography, even when I was a graduate student. But the next generation, they'll be able to see the ocean. So it's a hopeful message there. And the data is going to help society. I'll give you examples from hurricanes, then I'll jump down to the Antarctic. And really, there's a mantra of a technologist we work with, Doug Webb. He's a fantastic old gentleman, and this is his theme he gave our lab, and we try to live by it as much as possible, which is work hard, have fun, and change the world. So what's the problem? Well, here's the challenge for our students going through school right now, because they're going to have to solve it over their professional lifetime. If you look at the Earth at night, that's the pictures of where lights are on the continents. And we need to transform this map to look like this map. So this is the map of global population. So you see a wide disparity. So look at populations here in Africa. You know, they essentially don't have lights on at night. And so equality and distribution of energy so people can live. Population is growing, often in the areas where there is no power, and the Earth is changing. So here's the projection of water scarcity. And if you look here, areas of great unrest, that was predicted in the 70s by the climate scientists, because you were going to change farming communities into urban communities and great religious strife. And so, good luck, next generation. And the ocean is a big part of it. The problem is the ocean's complex. So all these arrows represent different processes, and there's interactions with the atmosphere, deep ocean, land. And if you look at how I was trained as a scientist, I was trained on this arrow right here. And the problem for the next generation is they need to think holistically how the whole system works. And that's actually a great science problem. It's exciting, and they're going to have tools, but we're still learning how to do that. And the reason is can you hear me? It's rough. Sorry. This is me standing on the 3rd floor of the ship, crossing the Drake Passage. It's a nice sunny day. Most of my grad students are down in their bunks puking right now. And it's really, this is your laboratory and your workspace. And so there's some fundamental challenges in just getting work done. Here's a picture on the back deck. We're about 20 feet above the water line. Here's a wave coming in. He's buckled in, safety first. And then you have everyone else behind as he sort of gets material out to us. And you see the lines going in that direction. It's a tag line, and connected on the other end is the wheel of a train car. That's our anchor. And you can see how strong the currents are that you're carrying out vertically. And so it's just dangerous to work at sea. I was once hit by a big wave on the back deck of the ship. I managed to hold on to something, called home, and then it was a game of telephone where the message changed. By the time I came home, a rumor had spread through my town that I had died at sea. Luckily that wasn't the case, and everyone was happy to see me. So it's dangerous, and this is how we're trying to go to sea. Drive a ship around, and these are my 3 people I form a lab with. I'm the biologist, so I have the head in the water. And we drive around on research vessels, which are great tools, but it moves at the speed of about a 10-speed bike. And we stop and we drop a bucket over the side, and we hope to describe this 3-dimensional soup that's changing every time the wind changes direction. And so early on, we decided we had to figure out a new way to do it. And just to show you, that was actually a Wisconsin cheese factory postcard. But here's a picture of me. I'm in the Antarctic ice edge. This is all ice algae brown. And just like the postcard, I'm hanging over the front here trying to get a sample. And this gives you an idea of the scale you're trying to see. And so we developed a new way where we essentially beam all data onto campus, and we make it free over the web. So this is the Cool Lab. Essentially, we get models, we get data from satellites, radars, undersea robots. When we're out on ships, we do it. Numerical models, we build sensors, and we use the Northeast United States as our laboratory. So we built a network that spans 1,000 kilometers that collects data 24/7. It beams it real time back. It goes to the web. It's open access to anybody. We get about 250,000 web hits a day in the summer. 70% of the general public or companies. If you look at the domain name, it's not just nerds looking at the data. And I'll give you a flavor for some of the instruments. And when we build these systems, we have lots of interesting science questions, but we tie every science question to some societal need. Maritime safety, management of ecosystems, water quality, coastal innovation, offshore energy. This is a big one. If New Jersey has no offshore wind turbines right now, by 2030, it'll have 5,000, because all our nuclear power plants are going off. And the ocean data is the biggest unknown. So we build our networks not only trying to do cool science, but also help society in real time. Satellites, we all know how they work. They take these large snapshots of the surface ocean. You can measure things like temperature, storms on the ocean, you can measure the amount of plankton, and they create maps. And we build redundant networks with other universities and groups so that the system never goes down. The other one that makes surface maps, these are high-frequency radar. They're really high-frequency radio. They send out, it's a speed gun like the policemen use, but for the ocean. And we're bouncing the sound off waves of certain heights. And what it does is it allows you to make a map of the surface currents for the entire thing. Here's New Jersey, and it's going out about 150 miles. And so every hour you have a map of currents. Who cares other than a few nerds who are trying to track something? You do if you're out there and your ship goes down, or your boat goes down. So your boat's going down, you get on the radio, you give your latitude and longitude, and you jump overboard. And then the Coast Guard gets your message, and the first thing they know is the position you were at is not going to be the position you will be at when they get out there, because it takes time to muster, and it usually takes hours. There used to be so much uncertainty that if you called in this point, the uncertainty of your position was almost the size of the state of New Jersey. We reduced the search area by 70%. And 70% searching reduction means more people will live, simply because the longer you're in the water, the more likely it's going to die. This is now the most requested data source by the Coast Guard, and it's only a few years old. Well, I know this is Salt Lake City, we can't help you there, but if you look at the country as a whole, the Coast Guard is incredibly good at rescuing people. They rescue about 10 people a day on average in the United States. The problem is 13 people go in the water every day in the United States. There's going to be a national network built around the country with this. Because of that, we think we will rescue 2 of those 3. Third, shark. And so you get surface maps. Drones are moving in. So here's a nice fixed-wing drone, and this is a map of penguin rookeries. And these little drones now can make high-resolution maps down to centimeters. And we've been mapping penguins on this island for almost 20 years. It took 6 days. We drop off 2 graduate students, we drive the ship away, we let them live in tents, and they count everything. We go pick them up when we're done. This drone here, this small guy, can map everything in about 40 minutes. And if you look, you see all the orange, that's penguin guano. You see little glowing things on that one, those are adults and chicks. The chicks release more heat, you can tell the difference. You can also do ecology. These are humpback whales, and they form bubble nets to get all the krill concentrated. When they come up right through the middle of it, swallow all the krill. So here's one. You can see another one coming up here with his mouth open. And you couldn't sample this before, because the way to sample it is you go out in a Zodiac and you sit in the middle of the public market. That's not a good place to be. So the drones are allowing us to look at behavior. Here we've actually radio tagged with a video camera a whale. It's swimming around, we're getting pitch and roll. You're going to see it open its mouth as it swallows. It's coming up in a minute. And then you'll see the krill that got away sort of flowing by its body. So it'll start looking out. There's the big gullet opening. And then you start seeing the krill that, are very happy they escaped. So now we can actually sample animals underwater. That's cool for biology. It's incredibly important for the physics. So the Southern Ocean, the largest ocean that drives climate on this planet, we don't even have a heat budget right for it. That heat budget was solved by radio tagging elephant seals that collected so much data swimming around looking for food. We finally had the data. The seals solved what the humans couldn't do in 2 years after a century of work. Let's talk about the robots, because I love these guys. This gives you an idea of scale, 150 pounds in air, neutral in the water, and it's a buoyancy wire. So here's a swarm of them, and essentially they allow you to maintain almost a continuous presence in the ocean, but you're connected to it every time it surfaces. It comes up and checks on how things are going. And so if you look at what our lab has been doing, so we're just a lab, and all these red dots and red lines are missions we've flown off on campus. And the great thing about being on campus, it means undergraduates get to be part of it as it's happening, as opposed to reading about it in a book. Science is fun if you're doing it. Even I would admit science, reading it out of a book, can sometimes not be exciting. So you can, as a group, have a global presence, but now there's no reason any undergraduate in the country can't access the data and be part of the experiment, because it's all over the web. And that's been enabled by the Global Communication Network, Iridium. So, and I apologize to students who heard this story earlier today, but when I was just about to start graduate school, I was down in Antarctica at Palmer Station, and this is how we call home on the ham radio. One-way communication, and then you say over, and then they talk back, you say over, and the whole world gets to listen to the conversation. Given a lot of us broke up with our girlfriends and boyfriends, it's pretty miserable. It was the way we did it. Now if you compare it to Iridium, so you see the robot here's got its tail above the water, that tail is the global phone, and that calls the lab in New Jersey. And we were out doing an experiment, we were on a ship out here, the British were up here in the base, and it was all controlled by our lab in New Jersey. That's our old lab before we cleaned it up. It was really controlled by this guy, Dave, and he was coordinating the pickup. So the red line is what the robot flew, the blue line is what we wanted it to fly, had to go through ice fields and all this kind of stuff. And he had a date in New York City about when it was supposed to be picked up. He took his smartphone, he got in the car, he moved the pickup time by a half hour, had the robot fly into the Brits. He wanted to do it because he wanted to get the robot picked up before he hit Lincoln Tunnel, in case he didn't have a cell phone connection, smartphone connection. So this guy controlled a robot in Antarctica while driving on the turnpike and still had dinner, in the city. And so that is unprecedented. That was science fiction, even when I started as a young professor. And the new generation can be anywhere on the planet at any time, all the time. We're still learning how to do experiments and do the science with that kind of approach. How do these robots work? They have a little ballast pump in their nose. They suck in water, about a coffee cup. They have batteries right here. They pitch those batteries forward to get the nose to dip down. So it's just like the submarine movies in World War II, everyone run to the front. It sinks forward. It's got wings to sort of get it in a forward direction. Gets to the depth it wants. It pushes the water out. It pulls the battery back, and now it starts floating up. So it's doing a sawtooth through the water. In the middle, it's carrying science sensors that are just recording data continuously. And then every so often, it comes up to the surface. It it does is checks its position. Am I lost? Am I off course? Then it checks, is there a human who wants to talk to me? Then it checks, did the human leave an email? Because the human's lazy. And then it goes back on its way. And by getting rid of the propeller, you now have a robot that would last for a day at sea, and now it can last for a year at sea. So you can cross big distances, and you can do it from the comfort of your home. And because you're collecting so much data, you get sheets of data. When you go out on the ship, you get a profile, 20 miles later, a profile, 20 miles later, a profile. So we can see things we couldn't see before. And the global omnipresence, a good example, is a glider Darwin. We were flying with our friends in Australia and Perth. So here we are, we deploy the glider in, it's 3 p.m. their time, 3 a.m. our time, we get going, we go home, go to sleep. While we're asleep, it happens to surface right by the guy who's sport fishing. His reaction, of course, I'm going to steal it. But unfortunately for him, once that robot is in the air, that tail can talk to us. So when we came in the next morning, sorry, right there, he was parked somewhere in one of these berths. He put the robot in his truck. He took Highway 34 outside of Perth. He lives in that house. He put it in his front yard, like a little gnome. And so we decided to mess with him. We have a sensor on there called altimeter. It's a chirping sound. We turn it on. It attracts the attention of this neighbor here. He looks over. You see it's got wings, it's yellow, it has a big American flag on it because we're flying things, and this was during a Gulf War. And so her natural reaction is, oh my God, you stole a cruise missile. She threatened to call the police. He panics. He throws it back in his truck. He drives back into Perth from Highway 34, dumps it in the grove of trees in the warehouse district. We're watching the whole thing. At this point we got popcorn. All our Aussie friends in, they dust it off, and they throw it back in the water and does this experiment. We did send a letter to the guy. The first one, we pretended to be the CIA. Told him, don't ever touch us again. And then a week later, we said, no, we're from a university, and we sent him some swag. So, you can be anywhere, and you can see things in real time that you couldn't before. So now let's take 2 examples of how this data is going to help society. We're going to start with hurricanes because that's where we spend a lot of time. And these are all the hurricane tracks. So they start off Africa, they strengthen, and then they swing in depending on their trajectories. And the thing about hurricanes and cyclones, if you look at the billion-dollar events that affect the U.S., look at the amount that's associated with these large storms. And so these are the most destructive storms where you really measure the damage in billions of dollars on every event. And we see it every summer. We had Hurricane Michael before, we had Houston before that, and before that was the Northeast. I was just in San Juan, Puerto Rico last week, and that island isn't even close to recovery. Essentially their water system is failing for half the island. And so these are incredibly destructive events. The good thing is we make progress, at least in Western society, to deal with the storms. We measure it in billions of damage. If you go to mega typhoons, which you see in Asia, we still measure that damage in terms of how many thousands of people die. And that's something we have gotten better. If you combine all the other natural disasters, hurricanes equal that for the U.S. over the last 10 years. So it's a big problem. So the Weather Service has been working really hard on it with public investment, and they've really improved forecasting where the hurricane's going to land. And it's amazing the technology they built to do that. When Katrina hit New Orleans, it went around the city and came in from the backside, and they predicted that. That's amazing. That was a pipe dream before. The problem is if you look at us predicting the intensity of the storm at landfall, it's only shown minimal progress. So here we've increased the prediction by orders of magnitude, and here 10%. And you could argue it's not even significant because of these good things. So we don't do intensity at all. Why does that matter? When a storm is coming, you need to decide, do you evacuate? Do you stay in place? Where do you reposition power trucks to be there immediately after the response, along with first responders? And the example from Sandy was they had all the trucks pre-placed. There was so much air in the surge, they parked the entire power rescue fleet 1 mile too close to the beach. And it was wiped out. It was $100 million worth of damage to the rescue fleet coming in. So we got to experience them live in real time. First, one year we had Hurricane Irene. This storm was 15 billion in damage. It had been the first one along the upper Northeast in a long time. The intensity was way over predicted. At the time, we had a very quiet Governor Christie, and he was on the beach beforehand screaming, "Get the hell off the beach," in classic New Jersey style. The storm veered a little bit, and it turned into a massive rainfall, and we evacuated 1 million people from the New Jersey shore into the flooding area. So that wasn't too hot. A year later, Sandy came, much worse. We under-predicted the surge, that's where the power trucks, and what happened on the Jersey shore is no one believed the forecast from the summer before. So there was a huge amount of rescue of people trapped down at the shore because they didn't believe the forecasts. The one thing you need to know about the Mid-Atlantic, here's the ocean, here's shore, here we're going offshore. In the summertime we have hurricanes, we have a super hot surface layer of ocean, and we have a super cold remnant cold pool, we call it. It's a 1,000-kilometer undersea river that runs along our coast. And that's going to come back and tell you about the hurricane. We call this barrier a thermocline, and that's the strongest ocean thermocline on the planet on a hot Jersey summer. So you go from 28 degrees to 8 degrees in 1 week. So let's look at Irene. So here we are looking at sea surface temperature. Red is hot water, blue is cold water. This is before the storm hit, right here. This is what it looked like after the storm. It was an 11-degree difference. What happened? Well, as the storm was approaching, we happened to have a glider out flying off New Jersey, off the coast, one of those robots. It was actually flying for the state measuring water quality. It's a robot can collect way more data than the traditional way they did it. And before the storm arrived, essentially the storm was strong enough to cool the ocean by 5 degrees in a half hour. So it makes the ocean, instead of a fuel source to the storm, it becomes a fuel sink. And that's why the intensity was over-predicted. And it was because of that cold pool that existed. And it had some currents circulating that sort of pushed the water on, the hot water onshore. But because it was 2 layers, it's a reverse flow. And you transported water offshore underneath, and you didn't have as big a surge. The Weather Service couldn't see that because the Weather Service only uses satellites for their ocean data. And once clouds come, there is no more data. You can't see the ocean surface. So they have to assume the ocean's constant, but it wasn't. It changed. So this was the forecast they did. If you run the forecast, if you put the real ocean in, this is what the storm really looks like. And the difference in terms of the storm is a Cat 1 hurricane versus just a tropical storm. It's about 15 knot reduction, 50 miles per hour, 20 miles per hour reduction in the speed. So we have the smoking gun of why we don't do intensity. We don't have a real ocean in the Weather Service models. The Weather Service acknowledged this. So this is Lou Salini, he's head of the Weather Service. A week after Sandy, he actually came up. This is our ocean data class. And he challenged the undergraduates. His message was, you can't wait for you guys to be PhDs to solve the problem. People are dying now. And challenged to use the data and figure out why our models were so bad. And this is a paper that was published, and those are undergraduate first authors. So my message to undergraduates is not to wait to graduate school to be a scientist. We need you to be a scientist now. Okay, so that was one societal benefit. let's go to a picturesque place that's also showing the Antarctic. I work on the West Antarctic Peninsula here. Blues mean that ice is growing. Red means ice is melting. And this place on Earth is the fastest ice melting place on the planet. And it affects what lives there because the entire ecosystem essentially is structured around the sea ice as it rises. So let's show you some of the temperatures. So here we are in the 50s. This is winter air temperature. And we've gone up almost 7 to 8 degrees average winter temperature. Is that a big deal? Well, think of it like your freezer. You got your ice cream in there. It's below 0. It's great. You dial it up 4 degrees and you're near 0 or 1. It's not as good. It's mushy. And the other thing you see is these big oscillations. That's what you expect in polar systems, but that's disappeared. It's become a maritime climate along the West Antarctic Peninsula. This is sea ice. So in 2 locations, it's showing you it oscillates year to year. But generally, it's been declining. This last year, we were back down here. So the place is warming. Ice is melting. 87% of the glaciers are in full retreat. And things are happening now even on land. Soil's being made naturally because it's not covered with ice. You're starting to have plants. And by the time I retire, there will be rooted plants growing on this place. We got involved for this long-term project. We just finished our 27th year down there 2 weeks ago. I took this year off. But essentially what we started with was looking at penguins. And so this is the Adelie penguin. There's 2 types of polar Antarctic penguins. There's happy feet, the big emperor one, about up to here, and the Adelies are about up to me. And they're awesome. And when you look on the West Antarctic Peninsula, their rookeries aren't uniformly distributed. They're in very specific locations, and we wanted to know why. And this is Bill Frazier, who essentially has been following the penguins since the 70s. He got out of Vietnam and decided he was going to become a penguin biologist, and has pretty much lived on the ice this whole time. And he's been tracking the population, and it's not looking so good. So here's the Adelie at Palmer Station, and there used to be almost 16,000 breeding pairs. We're down to about 1,000. And so he's tracked that. And islands he used to go to that were so loud with penguins now are empty and barren. And all he hears is the wind. It doesn't mean that life disappears, life changes. So these penguin species, kinstraps, gentoos, they're subpolar. They live to the north, and now they're invading in the Antarctic. And so you're seeing a whole new community move in. And so we wanted to know what was driving the changes and why were the penguin rookeries not equally distributed. So what's driving the change? It's the deep ocean. Here's Antarctica, and this is the Antarctic circumpolar current. It's the only circumpolar current that's unimpeded by land on the planet. It's the largest current on the planet, and it's flowing at about the speed of 75 Niagara Falls continuously. It's deep. It's about 300 meters, so just about 1,000 feet under the surface. You can't see it from the satellite. And it's warm, 4 degrees Celsius, balmy for down there. And what we're seeing is the areas that are melting is where this current gets really close to the continent. So we think that it's spilling heat over, and that's what causing ice melt. Areas that are still growing ice, this current essentially veers way offshore and comes back in. So this area is losing ice, this area is losing ice. So how do you sample it? So the current comes along the continent, there's a continental shelf, and essentially the current interacts with the edge of the shelf, and a little piece breaks off every so often and goes onto it at 300 meters. We have to use robots. And so those are the gliders. They can be out there all the time. They can be at 300 meters. So these are the maps we've made of these squirts of hot water coming in. And then we surf them underwater at 300 meters remotely from New Jersey. So essentially we look for a temperature fingerprint of the water, and then we try to follow that temperature for as long as we can. So we do it for about 7 days. And as these eddies essentially get carried close to shore, they lose heat. And that's the heat that's warming the atmosphere. the ocean and water pull so much more heat than air does that it is capable of carrying a great deal of heat out. And so it's little squirts of deep ocean water that's melting in this place. It's not the atmosphere. Okay? And it's associated with these large canyons that were carved by ancient glaciers. And they come in and they flow in, and they happen to end up at all the major penguin glaciers. So in the past, this was a completely ice-covered place. The penguins still needed access to the ocean in wintertime. And here, these warm blobs would be carried in by the undersea canyons and then upwell heat and create what we call plinies, which are areas of open water in wintertime. So they formed, these guys picked their colonies based on sort of conditions of the past. And now it's all changed because there's no longer ice up there. And so if that's the case, you should be at the penguin colonies be able to see warm water coming up and surfacing in the colonies. So here's a glider map of it. There it's upwelling hot water. That's opening up the Galicia. Here's another one, penguin colonies on this side of the island where the hot water is. Not really on that side. So if you want to measure change in the ocean, you've got to connect all these linkages from the deep ocean, small scales, all the way to the end. That's really hard. We couldn't do it before, but now we can. And so we can do stuff. So how are the penguins being impacted? Only 2 more science slides, I promise. So this is called an anomaly plot. So if you're above 0, it's a big year. If it's below 0, it's a low year. And this is the amount of plant material in the ocean. So some years you have not much plant material, some years you have big. This here is a map of what the penguins are eating. And they eat krill, Antarctic krill. And the krill are in lots of sizes. So when they're small, they're baby krill. When they're big, they're adult krill. We didn't kill the penguins to get this data. You essentially catch the penguin, you pour a little seawater down its throat, it pukes, and then the scientists gather up the puke and shit. So very romantic lifestyle. So what you see is in a year where you have a big chlorophyll peak, it's an adult population of krill. Well, they got a lot of food, they kind of have a party, they open a glass of wine. The net result is a huge amount of recruitment of larvae the next year, and you reset the population. Here it happens again, reset, reset, reset. So it's a tightly coupled food web. If you change the amount of plant material, it directly affects the krill sizes, and then that ripples up to the penguins. So as it's melting, what's happening to the plants? This is comparing the 70s and 80s from satellites of the amount of plant material in the water. So in the south, it's red, there's more plants. Blue means much less plants. Why is this red? This used to be completely covered with ice. So it's a tabletop. There wasn't much sun getting in the ocean, and without sun, plants can't grow. Here, well, it's completely ice-free. Now it's feeling the full force of the Antarctic wind, and the ocean's mixing really deep. So the plants actually are getting much less light. And on top of it, this atmosphere has become moist. So it's become cloudy. It used to be open, dry, polar atmosphere. Now it's cloudy. So this ocean has become darker. So as you turn down the light, you turn down the amount of plant growth, and that's where the penguins are declining. And down south, you've removed a tabletop, added light to the ocean, and the ocean is turned on. Once the ice is fully melted here, it'll transition to blue. Okay, so we have cool toys, we can go to cool places, now we got to educate the next generation. So here I am trying to inspire a series of Asian kids giving a lecture in Taiwan. At the same time, we need good teachers. I found this on the Whisper website, where people put up their thoughts, and I'll just read what people perceive as science. I don't want to be I want to be a math and science teacher, but no one wants to marry a boring person like that. I don't want to die alone. I agree with that, you know. And so we do a real bad job of communicating science. And, you know, there's lots of great tools to convey excitement of what we do. But I know I wasn't trained in that. And I'm still learning. I was at a storytelling conference the second week of January, just learning skills. At the same time, the government was really concerned we're not training the next generation of scientists and engineers. The amount of students going into those degrees is going down. And they're tending to be more conservative rather than during the space race, let's go change history, let's do something risky. They're becoming much more risk averse. So we were in a meeting, Dr. Rick Spinrad, former administrator for NOAA, said, I'm taking you guys out for a drink. This was his first sentence. You know, I had something you can do for the good of the country. You're like, oh my God, listen to that conversation. And he told us to take one of your gliders, modify it, fly it across the Atlantic. No robot had ever crossed an ocean basin before, and have your students fly it. And then he left us. And his driving concern was this National Academy work called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. It was Bill Gates Sr. and a bunch of industries and corporations that commissioned it. And their concern was, how do we get more scientists and engineers? So here was the challenge. At the time, that green line was the longest mission we had ever done. The red line is what our boss told us to do. And the power budget for the gliders is 3 of those Christmas tree lights per day. And so how do we expand the mission to get all the way across an ocean? And so it was risky. It was something no science agency was funded because they become risk averse. But luckily we had a donor who happened to call and we said, we want to do this. And he sent us a check and said, go do it. We built a glider. It immediately caught on across the whole university. Here's his Facebook friend. It was single at the time. 185 friends. I had about 80 friends at the time. And we sent it across the ocean. It got all the way to the Azores and it was eaten by a shark. After the students had lived with it for about 150 days. We know it was hit by a shark because we couldn't go get it. It was about 90 feet under the water. It was going up. Something very big came up, struck it from below. That's a typical predatory shark thing. They swim circles underneath you and then move in. They bite, they try to wound its prey, and then wait for it to die before they eat it. The glider has some behavior as panic mode. It starts to leak. It panicked. It jettisoned and waited, got to the surface, but it was so far out to sea there was no way we could get it. So we toasted it with coffee, downloaded the engineering data so we could see what happened. And it drowned. And then we went back to the undergraduates and said, this is science. You're going to take risks, you're going to lose stuff. We rebuilt the glider, and then essentially the next second attempt got all the way to Spain. We went to the town of Iridium. It was the student's choice, because that was where Columbus's ship, the Pinto, was the first to return back from the New World. The students who were helping fly it started as a group of 2, and by the time we finished, we had a group of almost 70 per term, and 30% were non-science majors. We had art majors, English majors, and they were realizing data wasn't fun. We turned it into a community event. New Jersey kids filled the glider with letters to Spanish kids. The Spanish kids picked them up, returned it, it became an international event, recognized by Smithsonian. But if you look what it does for education, here's enrollment in marine science majors. So this is prior. Here's our 4-year cycle of this whole mission. We almost doubled enrollments. We increased diversity by a factor of 2, and that hasn't dropped off. Then when you're an undergraduate, you can do informal research. That's what a lot of our students were doing, or you can do formal theses. And that can play out. If you're doing informal research, you can do a formal thesis. It's beautiful. And so it had direct impact on the community. So in conclusion, and looking forward to the next generation, because they're the ones who are going to carry the torch to the finish line, you're going to have great ways to see the ocean that was, something out of movies when I was coming up. Being able to see the ocean, manage it, use it in a sustainable way is going to change how humanity lives with the ocean. And we need it for energy, we need it for food, we need it for all kinds of resources we don't have on land. It's most of the planet. And the great thing is anybody can be an economist. even though you're not living right at beachfront property yet, you're going to be able to be an active part of it. And so I really thank you for your time coming out and listening to a geeky lecture on a Tuesday night, but it's my honor to be here. So thank you much. I was asked to put together for an international conference. So this just gives you an idea of what the West End Peninsula looks like. That's in Delhi. They're amazing in the water. That's a teenage one losing its down. That's a gentoo. Your elephant seals, albatross with its chicks. You sort of get an idea of the scale of ice skates right on the ocean, mountains, and then glacier calving is constant around there. It sounds like continuous thunder. And this was just cool. So, anyway, thank you again.